All right, this is lecture number 6 for World War II. Today we're going to talk about the second part of the European campaign, and we're going to start out with where we left off, and we're going to now start with the attack on Italy. As you can see from the map here, we invade Sicily to start, and then we move on and we go into Italy, and then are going to try to make our way up into Germany. But there is some competition here, and Hitler's going to try to stop us from doing that because he doesn't want to have a two-front war. So it's very important that he stops us at that point. All right, so the Italian campaign is the United States and the British basically rising up through Italy. Okay, so it's one of the deadliest campaigns of the whole war. We expect it to be really quick, but it becomes very brutal. Okay, the Allies are led by Montgomery and from England and by Eisenhower, and then we're fighting against the Axis. All right, so the North African success made Italy into the easy target. Mussolini's plans had already failed. He wanted to create a new Roman Empire, but that did not work out for him. His forces were actually fairly weak, and we wanted to totally just knock them out of the war. Okay, so what ends up happening is we have 250,000 Allied troops land on Sicily, and it's the greatest amphibious operation of all time. Mussolini is forced out, and the Italian government signs an armistice with the Allies, but the Nazis continue to fight, and they occupy Italy and defend Italy and kind of pick up where Mussolini left off. Okay, and there's a huge battle. It's called Bloody Anzio, and one of the bloodiest battles of all time. And Italy is not free until after the war in 1945 because they are occupied by the Nazis. All right, we have another conference, the Tehran Conference. Okay, Stalin is now involved. And basically, the U.S. and Great Britain decide to help take France. And then kind of the idea that, we want to open that second front, and we're still trying to help Stalin out in that way to make sure that there's not so many German troops invested in the Russian campaign. So the USSR would now help with Japan after Nazi defeat. So Stalin agrees that he's going to help defeat Japan after they defeat the Nazis. So it's kind of like, if we help you now, then I'll help you later. And we'll see how that turns out later. All right, so we have D-Day, which is the invasion. A very famous invasion seen in many, many movies, Saving Private Ryan, for example. So it's called Operation Overlord. It's the best kept secret of the war. Eisenhower is planning this, and he starts to deploy troops to make it look like he's going to land somewhere else. They bomb different beaches to make the Nazis think they're going to come out of different areas. So they do a lot. They actually have they start to stage troops and stage fake tanks and stuff off, different coasts in England to make it look like they're going to come from a different spot. But it ends up being a very successful landing, very bloody, but they take the mainland of France, and they end up liberating France fairly quickly, and opening that second front that Stalin had been asking for all this time. All right, so here's kind of the way that it worked. It's kind of confusing, but the main idea is that they take these beaches. So the beaches that are very famous, they call them Utah, Omaha, Gold, Juno, and Sword. And that's where they kind of take the beaches. And once they get there, they go through and they take over everything and start moving eastward into Eastern Europe. All right, so what happens, there's 4,000 ships, 600 warships, 10,000 planes, 175,000 Allied troops, and they all land on Normandy coast. It's 4 days of fighting, but eventually we gain those beaches, and the Germans are pushed back, and there's more than a million Allied soldiers now on the continent, and they liberate Paris fairly quickly by July of 1944, and then they basically have the Nazis on the run. The Battle of the Bulge, basically the last offensive for the Germans. It's their final attempt to stop the Allied invasion, and they want to split the forces in half. So they bulge. It's called the Battle of the Bulge because they bulge through our line, and they want to split that line in half. And he believed that, Hitler believed that they were going to eventually lose the war. He kind of figured that they were going to lose, but if they could take this area, then they can maybe get a favorable peace agreement as opposed to being really harshly taken. All right, so what ends up happening is the Allied troops are near German soil, are forced back into the Ardennes forest, and then they blitzkrieg. The Germans blitzkrieg through the middle, and there's 2 weeks of fighting. They're fighting around the city of Bastogne, and then there's not that many American soldiers there. and they're basically trying to defend this city. And the Germans, for once, actually have a bad battle plan. They kind of surround the city at 5 spots, but they don't attack simultaneously. They attack one at a time. And what that does is it allows all the Americans in the city to move towards where they're being attacked, defend them off, and then move to other locations. They're fighting for 2 weeks. They start to run out of ammunition, and they're just basically waiting for an airdrop of supplies from their, from the bases. But the weather's really bad, so they're not able to drop anything because they don't know where it's going to land. And then finally on Christmas Day, the weather opens up, and they are able to drop the reinforcements, and they are able to hold off. And then Patton's army comes from the south, and they emerge, and they start to they defeat the Germans at the Battle of the Bulge. All right, following that, we have the Yalta Conference. Again, the big three are still there, and this is basically how we're going to finish the war. So in February of 1945, they meet. The points of the meeting: one is to celebrate the impending Allied victory in Europe. They know they're going to win. And then secondly, they want to figure out what to do with Germany and the rest of the war-torn Europe. They don't want the same thing to happen that happened after World War I, so they want there to be a successful peace treaty. So the agenda for FDR, he wants Stalin to join the war in the Pacific as soon as possible, and he also wants to create the United Nations. Churchill wants free elections and democratic institutions in Europe. He wants Europe to be the same as what he is in order to try to maintain a peace. He doesn't want another dictator to rise. Okay, Stalin wants the Soviet sphere of influence. He wants to be able to start taking over a lot of Eastern Europe, and it's kind of the prelude to the Cold War. And the advantages of Stalin: he doesn't have to do anything, so we want to give him as much as possible, or give him what he wants, so he will come in and help us. So the results: Germany and its capital, Berlin, are divided into 4 zones of occupation, and they give it to the 4 victorious countries, the main countries, so U.S., Britain, France, and the Soviet Union. Germans are to pay reparations. The Soviet Union would receive half, and then Stalin was to declare war on Japan 90 days after the defeat in Germany to come and help us, basically, with what we're doing in Japan and having to win that victory. We get the United Nations, and then Stalin is able to keep the eastern half of Poland, but he promises that he's going to enable free elections in Poland, and then also in Czechoslovakia, Hungary, and Romania. And obviously he doesn't do this. He takes them under his wing, and creates the Soviet bloc, which we'll talk about during the Cold War. All right, that's it for the war in Europe, and we'll talk about the war in the Pacific next. Thanks.